Okay, so the second argument in favor of redistribution that we want to talk about was brought forward by John Rawls and is known as John Rawls' justice principle. So as opposed to Jeremy Bentham, who lived in the 18th century mostly, John Rawls lived mostly in the 20th century, so more recent philosophy. And John Rawls started his philosophy about justice by thinking about what he called an original position. And the original position is the state in a society shortly before the people within the society agree on a social contract. And in this original position, no individual know whether they will be later rich or poor, or whether they will stay healthy or sick. And then in this original position, John Rawls argued individuals would prioritize three principles of justice and in order of priority. Well, the first principle is that they believe or that they would like to have equal basic liberties. Those are, freedom of speech, voting rights, due process. So those are basic liberties that we could argue are in line with the human nature, and they are indisputable. Everybody would like to have basic liberties like freedom of speech and freedom of thought and having the right to vote. So those are, that's the first principle. Well, the second principle is equal opportunity, like equal access to education or jobs, or in other words, the absence of any form of discrimination. And that also obviously corresponds to the nature of the human being. So now it becomes a little bit interesting with respect to the third principle. And the third principle states that inequalities are permissible as long as they benefit the poor. That is known as the difference principle. So just like Jeremy Bentham argued in favor of redistribution because it increases overall utility, John Rawls also defends redistribution simply because nobody knows in the original position whether they will need help from the solidarity community when people get sick or when they get poor. So then they would need to have redistribution, or that they would favor redistribution. But John Rawls now said that the difference principle states that inequalities are permissible as long as they benefit the poor. So let's say if we have two groups within society, we have the poor and the rich, and we tax the rich to give it to the poor. So then, just like with the Benthamian utilitarianism, we can easily see that taking away something from the rich and giving it to the poor may increase overall total utility. But John Rawls went a little bit beyond that, and he already realized that if you tax the rich too much, well, eventually they just give up producing anything, and they just take their capital and move it to maybe another country. So in other words, what happens is if you tax the rich more and more and more, the overall size of the pie may eventually shrink. So in other words, if the poor currently work for the rich and the rich makes, $100, and the individual poor makes only $10, but then if the poor tax the rich so much that maybe the rich has only an income left of, let's say, $50, and the rich may then say, you know what, I had enough, I'm leaving this country, and he shuts down his factory and lays off all the workers that made $10, and the workers who made $10, they make now nothing. That is basically, according to the difference principle, the point where redistribution is coming to a halt. So, in other words, redistribution should only be advanced to the point where it still benefits the poor and needs to stop where it starts hurting the poor. But when it starts hurting the poor, that could be very well be a situation where we still have inequality. So in Rawls' justice principle, Rawls is an advocate of redistribution, but it's a little bit more enlightened in the sense of Jeremy Bentham, in the sense that Rawls acknowledged that, you know, the optimum level of redistribution can never be that everyone has the same. Okay, so in other words, there's a natural limit to redistribution which is reached when further taxes would shrink the economic pie such that even the poor are being hurt. Okay, so that was John Rawls, and in the next video let's briefly talk about Karl Marx and his ideas about redistribution.